Gloria Asiedu had spent 43 years in this city, building a life that required no announcement. She had arrived in Toronto in 1981 from a small town outside Accra, 22 years old, and carrying a single suitcase she had packed and repacked 4 times before her flight, because she could not decide what counted as essential and what was merely familiar. She had cleaned offices in the financial district for 11 years. She had folded linens at a downtown hotel for 6 more. She had saved every spare dollar with a discipline that bordered on devotion. Not for herself, but for the daughter she was raising alone in a basement apartment on Keele Street. A daughter who always seemed to be reaching for something just beyond the edge of what their circumstances should have allowed. People in the building said that Yewande had her mother's eyes. They meant it as a passing compliment, the kind neighbors offer without thinking too carefully about it. But what they were really observing, without quite having the words to name it, was that both women carried in their gaze the same particular quality. A stillness that suggested they saw considerably more of any given situation than they chose to reveal. By the time Yewande turned 34, and Forbes placed her on the cover of its Canadian edition, founder and chief executive of Canopy Systems, the Waterloo-based artificial intelligence firm that had restructured supply chain logistics for half the major shippers operating in North America. Gloria was 67 years old, semi-retired, and spending most of her Tuesdays and Thursdays helping run the newcomer literacy program at the Bloor West Community Center, 4 blocks from the house she had bought with her own savings in 1998. The program served adults, mostly recent arrivals, who needed to learn English well enough to navigate a city that could be generous or bewildering depending entirely on which doors you managed to find and open. Gloria had found most of those doors through sheer patience, and she had spent the past decade holding them open for others. The staff at the center knew her by her knock before she reached the front door. The receptionist, a young Eritrean woman named Miriam, who had been one of Gloria's first students 6 years earlier, always had a cup of tea ready on the counter by the time Gloria unwound her scarf. There was a retired pharmacist from Manila who came in on Thursdays specifically because, he said, Gloria had a gift for explaining things without making a person feel small for not already knowing them. And there were the newer arrivals, from Haiti, from Nigeria, from Syria, from Honduras, who sat at the folding tables with their workbooks open and looked at Gloria with an uncomplicated trust that was given freely, because she had done nothing to earn anything other than exactly that. On the morning it happened, Gloria had already spent 2 hours at the center before making her way east along Bloor Street. Her granddaughter's birthday was 4 days away. The child had described a particular sweater she had seen in a magazine with the breathless, forensic precision only a 9-year-old can summon for something she wants badly. Mint green, cable knit, the little wooden buttons. Gloria had written it down in the small notebook she kept in her coat pocket and tucked it away with the quiet satisfaction of someone who liked having a clear purpose for an afternoon. She wore her good wool coat, the dark plum one she saved for the colder months, and she moved along the Mink Mile at the unhurried pace of a woman who had long since learned that rushing rarely improved outcomes. A crossing guard at the Bay Street intersection waved at her, though they had never formally met. 2 elderly women sitting on a bench outside a cafe nodded with the particular solidarity of people who have navigated the same city across several decades of its changing faces. Gloria nodded back and kept walking, her breath a small cloud in the November air, her mind partly on the sweater and partly on the letter she intended to write that evening to the city councilor, who had been dragging his feet on funding for the center's expansion. She had no reason to suspect the afternoon would not unfold exactly as planned. She had been a customer at Holt Renfrew for 21 years. She had bought her daughter's university graduation dress there. She had purchased a silk scarf for a colleague's retirement gift, leather gloves for herself, one December when she decided she had earned them. The woman who worked the ground floor fragrance counter sometimes called her by name. There was a sales associate in the children's section on the fourth floor who always asked after Yewande, having recognized her once from a newspaper photograph and been quietly charmed by the fact that the mother of a technology executive was standing in front of a stuffed animal display, utterly unbothered. She did not know. Stepping through the revolving door into the warm, polished interior of the store, that a man in a Navy security blazer near the elevator bank had already fixed his attention on her. His name was Todd Hare, 31 years old, 5 months into his role as a loss prevention associate, carrying a set of assumptions he had never examined closely enough to question. Standing a few feet to his left was his colleague Ryan, 3 years younger, quieter in manner, but entirely willing to defer to whatever Todd decided. The way people who have not yet formed their own convictions tend to defer to anyone who projects certainty. Todd had received no report of a suspect that afternoon. No alert, no flag description circulated through his earpiece. What he had received, across months of unexamined instinct, was a habit of attention aimed at certain customers, a way of watching that his training materials would have labeled profiling if anyone had taken the trouble to name it plainly, but which he experienced internally as something he called experience or reading the floor. He watched Gloria enter. He watched her consult the store directory near the entrance with the focused calm of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for, and something in his thinking decided, without evidence, without reason, that monitoring her more closely was warranted. Gloria found the children's section on the fourth floor without difficulty. She spent nearly 20 minutes there, pulling sweaters from the rack and holding them up, checking the buttons, examining the labels, because her granddaughter had a sensitivity to certain fibers. She found the mint green cable knit within the first 5 minutes, but kept looking after because she wanted to be sure she had not missed something better. She did not rush. She hummed quietly to herself, half a church hymn she could not quite recall in full, and when a young sales associate named Chloe approached and asked whether she needed any help, Gloria smiled and said yes. She was hoping to find a size 8 if they had one in the back. Chloe had gone to check when Todd arrived. He materialized beside the display table with the posture of a man who has decided in advance that he is the most consequential person in whatever room he enters, and asked Gloria, without any gesture toward courtesy, whether she had been helped yet. Gloria looked at him steadily. She said yes. The associate had gone to check on a size. Todd nodded in the way that is not really a nod at all, but rather skepticism arranged into a physical gesture. He asked whether she had seen anything else in the store she had enjoyed. The question was phrased as small talk, and carried underneath it the unmistakable suggestion that the real question was something else entirely. "I'm fine, thank you," Gloria said pleasantly. "I'm just waiting for Chloe to come back." Todd did not leave. He shifted his weight and pretended to examine a nearby display of folded pajamas. He had no interest in while Ryan arrived from the direction of the elevator and positioned himself at the end of the aisle, arms crossed, eyes on the coat pocket, where Gloria had placed her notebook and phone. When Chloe returned with the sweater in the correct size, she found the situation and understood it immediately. The way people who work in retail environments learn to understand certain arrangements quickly, whether or not they are ever trained to name them. Her expression tightened. She handed Gloria the sweater, the last one in that size, and watched as Gloria examined the buttons with the careful attention of a grandmother who was absolutely clear about what her granddaughter would and would not like. Gloria decided to take it. She folded the sweater gently over her arm and turned toward the register, at which point Todd stepped directly into her path. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you to come with me for a moment," he said. Gloria stopped. Around them, 2 other shoppers, a woman in a cream coat near the cashmere display and a teenage girl sitting on a bench by the fitting rooms, phone in her hands, both looked up. "I'm sorry," Gloria said. "Just routine," Todd said, which it was not. "We need to verify a few things in the office downstairs." Gloria looked at him with the measured patience of a woman who had, over the course of 67 years, encountered this particular kind of moment in several of its forms, and had developed a capacity to remain composed in it that was not the same thing as acceptance. It was something closer to practiced clarity, a refusal to allow the situation to be defined on the terms of the person who had manufactured it. "I haven't done anything," she said. "I'm holding one sweater, which I intend to pay for at the register behind you." "It's just procedure," Ryan added from the end of the aisle. It was the first time he had spoken. "I would like to speak with a manager," Gloria said clearly, loudly enough for the woman in the cream coat to hear. And the woman turned fully toward the scene, her expression shifting from curiosity to something more alert. What happened next took less time than it should have. Todd reached forward and placed his hand on Gloria's arm. Not quite a grip, but a pressure, the kind meant to suggest the option of one. And in pulling back instinctively, Gloria lost her balance and caught herself against the edge of the display table. The sweater fell from her arm to the floor. Her notebook tumbled from her coat pocket and landed beside it, splaying open to the page where she had written her granddaughter's birthday gift description in careful, deliberate handwriting. Mint green, cable knit, wooden buttons. The teenage girl, near the fitting rooms, was no longer looking at her phone. The woman in the cream coat said, "Excuse me," in a voice not addressed to Todd, but to the situation itself, as though speaking to the room's collective failure to do better. Chloe stood behind the register, with her jaw tight and her hands flat on the counter, watching without moving, her eyes recording everything. An older man, who had wandered into the section looking for the toy aisle, took one look at the scene and walked back the way he had come. Not out of indifference, but out of the exhausted knowledge of exactly what he was witnessing. Gloria crouched slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone whose knees required consideration, and gathered her notebook and the sweater from the floor. She was still entirely composed. Her hands did not shake. Her voice, when she spoke again, was quiet. "You have no cause to touch me," she said. "I would like to see whatever policy permits what you just did." It was a reasonable request, grounded in plain fact, spoken without a trace of hostility. But Todd, aware now of the growing audience at the edges of the section, 3 additional shoppers, Chloe at the register, the teenage girl who had stood up from her bench, felt the particular panic of a man who understands his authority is dissolving in public view. He told Gloria, in a voice stripped of any remaining pretense at procedure, that she was making a scene and needed to stop talking, or he would have her removed from the building entirely. Gloria straightened. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. "I have lived in this city for 43 years, she said quietly. "I have paid taxes, raised a daughter, and taught people to read in your neighborhood, and you are telling me to stop talking." It was not a threat. It carried no anger, not really, something older than anger. The kind of statement that comes from a woman who has outlasted so many certainties held by so many men, exactly like the one standing in front of her, and who knows it, and who intends for him to know that she knows it. Todd's face went very still. Somewhere in the section, almost imperceptibly, the woman in the cream coat exhaled. It was into that particular silence, heavy with what had been said and what had not yet been answered, that the sound came from the stairwell. Not dramatic, not loud, simply the quick, purposeful rhythm of someone moving through the floor, with the unhesitating momentum of a person who has already assessed the situation from a distance, and is arriving only to address it. The stairwell door opened. A woman stepped into the children's section in a dark blazer and trousers, still carrying the pressed precision of a conference day. Her event lanyard pushed half into her jacket pocket, where she had shoved it without stopping to remove it properly. She was 41 years old. Her hair was pulled back without vanity. She crossed the floor, with the controlled focus of someone accustomed to making rapid decisions in rooms, where the cost of a wrong one is very high. And then her eyes found her mother, and something in her face changed entirely, and none of the composure she was known for. managed to account for what crossed it in that unguarded instant. Yewande Asiedu had been 60 kilometers away when her phone rang. She had been three-quarters through the closing keynote of the Toronto Tech Summit. 1,500 people in a convention center hall, cameras running, her slides on a screen the size of a small building, when the call came through from the number she recognized as the community center's backup line. She had excused herself mid-sentence. This was something she had never done in 15 years of public speaking, and it registered as an event among the people in that room, a ripple of confused attention that she did not stop to consider. She had taken the call in the corridor outside, with her back against the wall. The voice on the other end was Miriam, speaking in the careful cadence of someone working very hard not to cause alarm. There was a situation. At the Holt Renfrew on Bloor. Gloria had called her first, had said only that she needed someone to know where she was, and then the call had dropped. Yewande had not asked a single follow-up question. She had walked back to the stage long enough to say 6 words to the event coordinator, family emergency, wrap the Q&A, and was in a taxi heading north on Bay Street within 4 minutes, already composing 2 messages and 1 phone call she intended to make before she arrived. She had not told the driver who she was. She rarely did. 12 years of building a company from a converted garage in Waterloo, 12 years of public recognition and private restraint, and she still felt a specific discomfort with the idea that her name should smooth situations that ought to go smoothly for everyone. It was something her mother had given her, not in words but in example. The practice of expecting decency as a baseline, not as a reward for credentials. She reached the store in 11 minutes. She took the stairs to the 4th floor because she had been told it was the children's section, and she was not willing to stand still in an elevator. When she crossed the floor and reached her mother, she looked at Gloria's face closely. The composed set of her jaw, the deliberate steadiness of her posture, the way her eyes said at once that she was all right and that she was not all right at all. She placed her hand gently on her mother's arm. "Mama," she said quietly, "I'm here." Gloria put her hand briefly over her daughter's. "I know," she said, "I'm fine." But Yewande had already turned. She looked at Todd and Ryan for a long, level moment that required no elaboration. She did not raise her voice. She asked, in a tone that was almost conversational, which of them had put their hand on her mother. Todd began to speak. Something about store policy, unverified reports, standard procedure. Yewande listened to approximately 8 words of this before she reached into her jacket pocket and took out her phone. She made 1 call. It lasted 40 seconds. When she ended it, she looked at Todd again. "The chief legal officer of this organization is someone I have had lunch with 6 times in the past 2 years, she said, with the particular calm of someone stating a verifiable fact rather than issuing a warning. She is going to call your regional director in the next 3 minutes. I would suggest you use that time to find your store manager." The manager arrived in 4. She was a woman named Louise, who had been in retail management for 19 years, and who had read the Forbes cover story about Yewande Asiedu on a flight to Calgary in September, and who stood at the entrance to the children's section for 2 full seconds, processing the scene before crossing the floor with her hands clasped, and her expression combining apology, alarm, and professional catastrophe in roughly equal measure. By the time the store's security footage was reviewed that evening, every angle, every camera, it showed with complete and unambiguous clarity a 67-year-old woman who had browsed a children's sweater rack, spoken politely with a sales associate, and been physically redirected against her will without a single justifiable cause. It showed Todd's hand on her arm. It showed the notebook falling. It showed Gloria crouching to retrieve it with the careful dignity of a woman who had decided, even in that moment, to remain precisely who she was. It showed the sweater still folded over her arm when Yewande arrived. Gloria had never put it down. Todd and Ryan were suspended before the end of business. Their supervisor, briefing the regional director by phone that same evening, said with some exhaustion that he expected the review to conclude. In the way these things inevitably concluded, when the footage was this clear, and the organization's exposure was this significant. A journalist from a national paper had been tipped off not by anyone involved, but by the teenage girl who had been near the fitting rooms with her phone. She had posted 3 words to her account. That evening, nothing inflammatory, simply "this happened today," with a brief, factual account of what she had witnessed. By the following morning, the paper had confirmed the details with Chloe, who gave a careful statement, and with the woman in the cream coat, who had not hesitated at all. The regional director called Gloria personally the following morning. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Toward its end, he mentioned a potential settlement, a figure generous enough to suggest the legal team had already calculated what a protracted process would cost in headlines alone. Gloria thanked him for calling. She said she would think about it. She said goodbye, set her phone face down on the kitchen table, and poured herself a second cup of coffee. 5 days after the incident, the community center on Bloor West held a gathering in its main hall. Not a protest, not a press conference. The kind of meeting a community holds when one of its own has been through something on their behalf and needs to be given space to speak. Gloria had not planned to say very much. She had written 3 sentences on a note card the night before and decided to start there and see where it went. She stood at the front of the hall in her dark plum coat and looked out at a room considerably more full than she had expected. Residents from the neighborhood, former students from the literacy program, 2 city councilors, journalists who had been asked to keep their cameras down for the opening portion, and in the second row, Yewande sitting very still with her hands folded in her lap. Gloria thanked people for coming. She said she was fine. She said the bruise on her forearm from the edge of the display table had already faded to a color she described, with a small smile as very nearly fashionable. Then she set the note card down and said what she had actually come to say. She spoke about her first year in Toronto, when she had worked the overnight cleaning shift in an office tower on King Street and had eaten her lunch in the freight elevator because the cleaning staff were not supposed to use the lobby. She spoke about a supervisor who had once questioned whether she had completed a floor she had clearly completed, because his assumption that she might not have was cheaper to him than the effort of actually checking. She said she had spent 43 years making herself visible in this city by doing things, by showing up, by teaching, by staying, and that she had not spent those 43 years becoming invisible, even if certain people persisted in attempting to make her so. "I didn't go to that store to make a point," she said. "I went to buy my granddaughter a sweater with wooden buttons because she saw it in a magazine and she thought it was beautiful." She paused. "What happened there was not about me specifically. I want to be clear about that. It was about an assumption that has existed in this city, in every city, for a very long time. And the only reason any of you are in this room tonight is that my daughter happened to be someone whose name carries weight in boardrooms. That should not be why it was taken seriously." She looked out at the room. "I want to say that directly." The hall was very quiet. A woman near the back pressed her knuckles gently against her mouth. "What I am asking for," Gloria continued, "is not a settlement. It is not an apology on company letterhead. What I am asking is that the organization responsible take a portion of whatever legal cost they were prepared to absorb and direct it toward genuine training, not a checklist, not an afternoon seminar, for every person in a customer-facing role. Training built around community input, around the kind of history that explains why a woman who has done nothing wrong is still required to justify her presence in a store she has visited for 20 years. She let the silence hold. "That is what I am asking. I will go home satisfied if that happens." By the end of the following week, the organization's board had committed to the program in writing. The announcement named it, after considerable gentle pressure from the city councilor and from Yewande herself, the Asiedu initiative, a name Gloria accepted only after insisting that it referred to the family, not to herself, and more than that to the community that had shaped them both. The first sessions were held, at her suggestion, in the very hall where she had just spoken, with the folding chairs arranged in the same configuration as the literacy classes she had been running in that room for a decade. Several officers who had attended the inaugural session returned of their own accord the following month, without any requirement to do so, simply because they had found it worth continuing. Todd Hare and Ryan did not return to their positions. Their cases were forwarded for further review, and their names became, in the particular way these things happen, anonymous reference points used quietly in industry training seminars for years afterward. Cautionary, reduced to a slide deck scenario, asking participants to identify at what moment a different choice could have been made. The reporters who sought Yewande for comment received the same brief response from her communications director each time. The family was grateful for the public support, and Ms. Asiedu had no further statement at this time. She had given one interview to the journalist who had broken the story, and in it she had spoken for 11 minutes and said nothing about herself at all, only about her mother, and about what it costs a person to remain dignified in circumstances specifically designed to undo them. 3 weeks after the afternoon, on the 4th floor, on a Sunday when the city had gone quiet under the first real snowfall of the season, Yewande sat with her mother in the kitchen of the house on Keel Street, the same kitchen where Gloria had once spread a university acceptance letter across the table and wept without making any sound. The radiator knocked and hissed. There was tea. The mint green sweater, tissue wrapped in a gift box, had been delivered to the birthday girl on the right day, and the child had worn it 3 days running. Gloria set down a letter from one of her literacy students, a woman who had seen the news coverage and written to say she was proud and was resting. She added it to the small stack she intended to answer. "I didn't tell you something," she said, without looking up from her cup. Yewande waited. "When you walked through that door," Gloria said, "before you even reached me, I could see your face from all the way across the floor." She turned her cup slowly in her hands. "I have seen you close deals on the phone. I have seen you give a speech to 1,000 people. I have seen what you look like when you are certain of something." She glanced up. "That is not what I saw." Yewande was quiet for a moment. The snow outside was coming down in the slow, unhurried way it falls when it intends to stay. "No," she said, "that's not what that was." Gloria nodded, satisfied, as though this confirmed something she had already understood. She reached across the table and covered her daughter's hand briefly with her own. "You came," she said. "That's what matters to me." "I will always come," Yewande said. "You know that." Gloria leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at the street she had lived on for 26 years. The street that had looked different in every season and had managed, at the end of any day that tried its best to take something from her, to look like home. The porch light was on. Snow was settling on the railing of the front steps and accumulating on the windshields of the parked cars down the block in the patient, indifferent way. Snow covers everything it finds, without distinction. Somewhere along the street, a neighbor's light clicked on in a front window, casting a narrow amber rectangle across the white. She picked up her tea. The radiator knocked twice, and the evening settled around them both in the quiet, unannounced way that the best parts of any life tend to settle. Not with ceremony, not with announcement, but with the simple and enduring fact of still being there.